3, 2, 1 und go.
Yeah, hello everybody. We are talking about identity management today. Self-sovereign identity, basically, where are we? Where are we coming from? Where are we going to? I think this is interesting because we have quite some activity in Germany here. We also have the Bundeskanzleramt, the Chancellor's office, being active here in the various domains. And that's why we have a couple of very interesting speakers here, for example, from BMW, from Veridos, which belongs to the Bundesdruckerei, then from a very important consortium, which is called LISI. They work on identity management from a consortium perspective. In this consortium, quite a number of well-known large companies are engaged, and also the consulting company called Define, which is also active in the field. Before we are starting with the panel discussion, before everybody introduces himself, herself briefly, I would ask primarily Mark to briefly present some topics around the SSI domain and to give us a little bit of an introduction such that we know what we are talking about when we are talking about identity management and SSI. This presentation will just take a couple of minutes, and thereafter we will engage in the discussion, in the panel discussion, and also each presenter will present himself briefly. Would this be okay, Mark? Because
yes, thank you.
Okay, then please proceed, and over to you.
Thank you, Philip, and a warm welcome also from my side. Great to have you all here. Today, we want to talk about a reality check for self-sovereign identity, and I would like to start you off with a few thoughts on why are we talking about this, what is it, and what are current challenges before we can start into the discussion with all of us here. So to get started, there's lots of people talking about SSI these days, especially in my bubble. And when all these people say, let's build an SSI-based use case, where's that coming from? And there's actually a couple drivers who are bringing this discussion forward. First of all, there's currently a lot of stuff going on in regulation and politics. For instance, there's the IDAS update. Then there's economic reasons. For instance, KYC costs are large, and if you want to reduce them, SSI could be a solution there. Then consumers also ask for different solutions. We're all tired of our clumsy password managers, and we want to manage our own identities. We recently faced a downtime of Facebook, which is also often used as an identity provider, and people couldn't log in to certain services. But then there's also the other side down here. We have different interest groups pushing this topic forward. For instance, there's the blockchain community, because SSI is often based on blockchain solutions, and decentralized ideas are generally appreciated by this community. But then there's also what I call software providers and infrastructure providers. So people who have invested a lot of time and effort and money into building solutions around SSI, and they obviously also would like to see things going forward and things progressing. So these are all reasons why SSI is currently being discussed a lot and why many use cases are being built. And as I mentioned, one of the main drivers is regulation and politics. And that's why I would like to take a quick deep dive into the eIDAS regulation. And there's a bit of text on here. I don't mean to scare you. I will walk you through the most important things. Just because when I've talked to people in the past about eIDAS, some of them seemed not to know exactly how eIDAS relates to SSI. I just want to shed some light on that. So the original eIDAS regulation dates back to 2016, and it basically addresses things like rules for trust services or to create minimum requirements for identification services, stuff like that. One important thing here is that it also asks states within the EU here for mutual assistance and to keep trust lists. So basically, this is all about interoperability of trust solutions in a nutshell. So this already happened a while ago. So why are we talking about eIDAS with SSI these days? Well, there's been an update proposal this year in June, which says one very important thing. It says IDs by social media providers and financial institutions raise privacy and data protection concerns. And there's also other reasons why they think that the eIDAS regulation from 2016 needs an update. And they now, and this is something I like, They changed the mutual assistance to mutual assistance and cooperation. So they ask states to actively work together, and most importantly, work together towards the creation of an EU identity wallet. So each state is asked to create this wallet and make it interoperable such that you can use it around the EU. Now, all of this regulation is generally technology agnostic. So it doesn't say you have to use blockchain. It doesn't say you have to use the Aries framework, but they do mention the term self-sovereign identity as saying that people are actually expecting their identities to be self-sovereign, and for them to be self-sovereign regarding their identities, and hence SSI and the eIDAS update proposal sometimes get mentioned in the same sentence because of this correlation there. Now, this has led to a couple initiatives, especially and also here in Germany. Just to mention from the Bundeskanzleramt, for instance, they started with hotel check-ins and now have added more. Then there's the digital ID based on the Ausweis app too. Those of you from Germany may know this app. You can use that with your personal ID card today. And then there's the Showcase Secure Digital Identities. And there's a couple of initiatives in here, mostly sorted by region, but also lots of use cases going on within these showcases. All right, so really just in a nutshell, where is this coming from on the regulatory side? And as I said, these are all people bringing this topic forward. They all want to push this topic forward, but there's also others. There's also the other side of people who say, well, maybe SSI isn't really ready to be brought to the masses. We see a lot of standardization efforts going on in the W3C and the Web3 consortium, and they have created well, a lot of ideas on what a technical solution should look like. And now in the recent past, Mozilla, Google, and Apple have actually risen a formal complaint where they claim that the ideas that they have partly actually actively worked on as well. For instance, they say no practical interoperability would be there and other things. So they criticize the standardization efforts and the solutions that are being proposed here. Then some of you, secondly, may have seen this picture recently. Our driver's license and ID card and so forth were supposed to be available in a first version of this identity wallet that went live. It was on the App Store for a couple of days before our Chaos Computer Club actually said, nah, that's no good. Man in the middle attacks are possible. It's not clear who receives my data. So they had a couple points where they said, this is not really mature enough to go live. And in the meantime, this app has been taken out of the App Store. And finally, people who are, or organizations who are actively involved in SSI use cases, like the Bundesdruckerei, for instance, they also take alternative approaches. So basically, next to working on SSI ideas, they also work on other solutions that work in a different way, where things do not happen exactly according to SSI. So this just as a starting point, there's people pushing this, there's people criticizing it. Now, for a quick recap, what is it actually that happens in SSI? And one thing that boosted SSI a lot was the use case regarding COVID-19 credentials. And this is something we can look at with this example here. So if you are a credential holder, a certificate holder, someone who wants to receive, for instance, a COVID-19 credential that you're vaccinated or that you're healthy, then this could be issued by a certificate issuer, a vaccination center here. They would send a verifiable credential to you, and you can then use that to create a verifiable presentation and tell, for instance, an airport, a certificate verifier, that yes, indeed, the thing that you are presenting is correct and has not been tampered with, and it's exactly in the same way as the vaccination center has issued it to you. Now, these two, they need to write and read from a shared ledger to make sure that signatures are extracted and have not been changed and everything is secure and cryptographically secured. But a few problems remain. So this is really basically all the SSI framework ensures. It ensures that when I present something here, they can verify reading from the ledger that I have not tampered with this credential and it hasn't been revoked. But there's a lot of other things we still need to address. And this is for all of these 4 items here. If we start with the issuer, they are represented by a decentralized identifier. And it is not said by the SSI framework what this identifier actually represents. Does it represent a single doctor, or does it represent the entire vaccination center, or does it represent a city? Then there's other things like you cannot know just from the SSI framework what has to go into a credential, how you want to represent information. And it is also not clear how to build the signing processes. So as soon as you want to send credentials to someone, perhaps you want to have a 4i principle involved or other things that need to be implemented, and SSI doesn't tell you, or the SSI framework doesn't tell you how to do that. So that is one thing that still needs to be solved on the issuer side. On the verifier side, you also have things that SSI doesn't answer for you. They need to know, for instance, if they can trust the issuer. Is that really a vaccination center, or is it just some guy around the corner with a decentralized identifier? And other questions as well need to be addressed. They do not come with the SSI framework as it is. And now the holder also needs some additional attention when building a solution. For instance, when they are sent information, send credentials, or when they ask for their credentials, they need to know who are they sending that to, or who is asking them for it. And SSI basically does not provide you with a way, with a means of knowing what it did, what this identifier actually is and who it stands for. So you need additional information here. So then there's more, what if you lose your wallet, how can you back up your credentials and so forth. And then finally, the ledger, which is where all the signatures go of the issuers, for instance, here. You need to clarify who's allowed to read and write and what is stored on this ledger. It's mostly clear what needs to be stored, but you can theoretically add more. And the main question is, who has an interest in running this infrastructure? It costs money, so why would anyone want to do that? Who has to pay whom in this use case? So there's all these questions involved. Now, before I come to the summary and we can finally start into the discussion, just one idea how you can address these 4 issues that I just mentioned, or these issues regarding these 4 entities in there. It's mostly inserting an additional role. So you've seen these 3 roles, the verifier, the issuer, and the holder. And if you insert another role, if you create an admin, an administrator, who has legal authority here and is entitled to implement, for instance, validation rules for verifiers, then you can create an issuance policy. Quality assurance can be there for issuers to follow, such that you can know who you can, what you need to do in order to be part of this ecosystem. And on the other side, the verifier, they can, for instance, ask a trust registry whether they can actually trust an identifier that has sent vaccination credentials to someone. So this is something that is often done, create an additional role, and this role will then get certain functionality in order to make sure that all of these processes that do not come with SSI as it exists in several frameworks today, that they are addressed. All right, as I promised, now for the summary, so we can start into the discussion. 5 points here. So we've seen that the general upward trend of SSI is caused by many effects, political, economic, and so forth. Mostly these regulatory changes and the desired economic efficiency are the drivers. There's been this EIDAS update proposal of this year. This further fuels the discussion also here in Germany. We see a lot of centralized ID providers and independent IT security experts raising concerns with respect to some SSI-based protocols and ideas. And SSI alone, this is one of the main things perhaps to take away from this talk, SSI alone does not solve all the problems related to identity. Additional concepts and implementations are required. And finally, as I said, one possible solution is creating a centralized entity that you usually have in a lot of ecosystems anyway. You have someone responsible and you add that to the framework and you implement it securely, and then you can basically proceed. All right, so these were the takeaway messages from me. So back to you, Philip.
Yes, thanks very much. I think this was a very good and helpful primer to understand what we are talking about today. And with this, I think I would like to propose that everybody briefly presents himself and also the company he's working for. Maybe Helge, would you like to get started here and present yourself, and also Lizzie?
Sure. Thank you, Philip. So my name is Harald Mitchell. I'm working for the main incubator, which is the R&D unit of Commerzbank. And yeah, we have started to explore self-sovereign identities 4 years ago. We were one of the first projects in Germany. And we call our product Lissy. So Lissy is a mobile wallet that you can download. And Lissy is also a software application that can be used by companies and institutions to issue, manage, and verify credentials. I'm also the consortial leader of the ID Union Consortium, which Mark already mentioned. And we are a big consortium which is building up a huge ecosystem for self-sovereign identities in Europe. So, and yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Excellent. Indeed, you and my incubator with Commerzbank in the background are really working on this since quite some while. And therefore, let's move on to Felix Goldberger. What about you and what is BMW doing in this area?
Yeah, thank you, Philip. Thank you for the invitation to this talk. So, yeah, my name is Felix. I work for the BMW Research Department as a project manager on the digital identity topic. So my department focuses in general on everything that relates to electric electronics. So that starts with the wires in the car, the wiring harness, then comes to the small computers in the car, the so-called ECUs, then touches also the middleware and the operating system, the applications, and then up until we reach the cloud. And yeah, in this kind of heterogeneous mixture of different technologies, SSI becomes a crucial role because each and every entity in this, let's say, flow of data, has to be identified in a trustworthy and secure manner. So that is why we at BMW would really appreciate looking into the topic a lot right now.
Okay, excellent. Since when is BMW doing this? Because BMW is, as far as I know, not so active in the blockchain field. You know, at least this is not visible.
Well, yeah, we try to reduce the communication to a point where we have really products that get to the customer. So we were not pushing all the different projects that we were looking into. Actually, in the past, we were working on many projects related to DLT and payments. So that was the activities from our research side. But also our IT department is heavily invested in blockchain and especially in the SSI world, also together with the activities that Helge just mentioned in the Lissy. So we are also cooperating with them there.
Okay, excellent. Sounds good. So apparently more is happening than what is visible from the outside. Perfect. And then Franziska, what about you and what about Veridos?
Yes, hello. My name is Franziska Muschig and I work in the innovations department at Veridos. And Veridos is a joint venture of Giesecke & Devrient and the Bundesdruckerei. And we are active in the international market around all products that are ID centered. So this starts with actually ID cards or passports, but also border control systems and IT infrastructure for governments to handle national registries, enrollment, personalization, and all those processes. And also, of course, coming from this connection from ID and government business, we are also active in the e-government environment. And this is also the area where we started conversations with our customers to analyze possible SSI solutions that could be introduced.
Okay, excellent. First, so thank you very much for this quick presentation round. And I think with this, let's start in the very base area of where we are starting here. So what about SSI? How would you define it? And actually the question also is key. Why do you think we need it? Mark already has given some points in his presentation, but I think there can also be brought about more arguments here. And maybe Mark, you start and summarize the key points of your presentation. How do you very briefly define SSI and why do you think we are needing this? And then let's do the entire round because then we have all arguments present.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And just to add, because I didn't have it in my presentation, I'm a manager at Define. We're a European consultancy. When we started 20 years ago, we were mostly concerning ourselves with risk management projects, helping banks, insurance companies with quantitative modeling and so forth. But we've grown a lot over the last couple of years. We're now over 1,000 consultants and we have a blockchain practice in which I've been working for the last couple of years. having been involved in many tokenization projects, but also pay-per-use projects, central bank digital currencies are an interest of mine, and obviously self-sovereign identity as well. Thanks for the question, Philip. Yes, so the importance, I think, here is to understand that SSI as a term, self-sovereign identity, can, on the one hand, be understood, I think, as a philosophical concept where people are in charge of their own identity aspects, again, where you do not have to trust others with aspects of your identity, just as an idea. But there's also specific implementations out there, plus specific standardization efforts out there. So for instance, there's the ARIES framework that you can basically use to implement your SSI solution in a way that it becomes interoperable with others. So there are lots of standardization efforts, but there's also concrete products out there, which I'm sure Helge will touch upon. So it's on the one hand a concept, and on the other hand, there's specific implementations, which is, I think, what defines SSI, additional to the general concept that I just presented in my slides.
Excellent, perfect. Who wants to proceed and add a couple of arguments? You know, we don't need to repeat these key arguments, but maybe there is more to this. Maybe Franziska, Helge, Felix, who wants to add a couple of arguments?
Yeah, maybe I continue. So most similar to what Mark just said, for me, SSI is first of all one technological option how we can implement an electronic ID system or ecosystem. But this one comes along with this big promise to bring back data sovereignty to the end users and bring it into the user's hand. And this concept actually, from my point of view, opens up the options we have in regards to use cases that could be implemented, because it's not handing over all my ID data each time, but really having a look what data I share and for what purpose I do share. So it gives a broad range of options, but it is also a very young technology approach. So as Mark already said, we have many questions that need to be solved and tested, and to find best practices, standardization, certifications, etc., to really make sure that the data is safe in this ecosystem.
Okay, excellent. I think this is a very, very valid point, which is additionally brought to you. Any more points, Helge, Felix?
Yeah, maybe the main advantage of SSI is that the user or this identity subject controls its own data, and that's really a big advantage. You do not have to rely to any third parties. And why is it important to banks? Because we are a subsidiary of a bank, so we are highly involved in the financial sector. And so far in Germany, we are still using post-ident in 48% of all the KYC cases, and nearly 50% are done via video identification, which is something we have an electronic ID. But you have you still do video ident, because EID for 10 years is not working. There's no user acceptance, and that's the reason why we look into SSI and hope with SSI where comes new opportunities for banks and lower, cheaper costs in the area of KYC processes.
Yeah, okay, excellent. But let me ask you one additional question here, going a little bit deeper. Okay, fair enough. I can control my own identity, but what about the entire data which is assigned to my identity? In these very extreme cases of SSI, all data points, be it my eye color, my body size, and whatever is stored decentral, and only I with myself with my private key can access this data. But then in the previous points, which you have addressed also in the presentations, you see that there must be a central data points for data verification and so on. So can you specify, and can you try to be a little bit more precise, what data is mine and what data points are stored elsewhere and are still mine, and which data points are stored elsewhere and might not be owned by me? I hope you get this point, because I think this is very important to dive into these details right away. Helge, could you elaborate on this question?
Yeah, sure. So the problem really is, so SSI is the concept, and normally you have all the data and you can share with third parties. But for example, if you share your data with banks, the banks is still required also have a copy of all the data, and all the banks you have relationships with, or insurances and other third parties also have to store it. And that is something, where we need some kind of discussions with regulatory bodies if you still need to really store all the data. When it comes to regulatory use cases, maybe you are required, but when it comes, for example, to e-commerce use cases where it is really not required, and this needs to be something to be discussed. But in general, SSI offers a concept where the verifiers do not need to store it really, because we always have a possibility to get the data from the user itself.
Okay, excellent. I think this makes very much sense. Anybody wants to add something here?
Yes, maybe one point, because I think there's this one crucial difference here in SSI. Yes, someone who issues data to you, they need to have the data before they can send it to you. And yes, after you have sent someone your data, they will have it and they will be able to store it, for instance, if they're a bank and they're required to. But the important thing to understand is that this always needs to go through you as the self-sovereign person. So basically you get the data and you send it along. It's not that you tell someone to send the data to someone else. It's not that you involve another party to verify in that moment that the data is actually correct. It is intrinsic to the self-sovereign identity concept that you as a user can pass on the data and it can be verified that it is correct without asking anyone but the distributed ledger where the signatures are stored. I think this is the crucial point here. The data always passes through you.
Absolutely. I think this was the very crucial point. Thanks to you guys. And one deeper question, then we proceed with the questions which we have prepared. What about, these masses of data in social media silos and domains and Google and Facebook and this and that, images and all kinds of things. It's tons of gigabytes per person with all the medical data, which you could also potentially attach and so on and so forth. Where would this data be stored? Mark, I think this is you're the perfect person to answer this.
Thank you for thinking that, because it's really not that simple to answer, I think, because it really depends on what type of data it is, and it really depends on the use case as well. Of course, you can create use cases with SSI where you pass on loads and huge chunks of data if the infrastructure allows for it, and if that is required. If you think of your mobile phone being the wallet where you store your keys and where you have your where you have all your credentials, then obviously you don't want to share entire movies as data between people as credentials and then store them in your mobile phone wallet. So it really depends on the use case. It depends on the type of data. I think the most important thing to understand is that we're talking about data that describes you. It has something to do with you, that you don't want anyone else, or that you don't want to be, where you don't want to be dependent on someone else. So that would be the kind of data that makes the most sense here, and that is not always these huge chunks.
No, I think this is perfectly fine, but with parts of these data where I really would like to know where this is also my purchasing behavior on Amazon, my social media stuff on WhatsApp, it's sitting in Facebook's data silos and so on and so forth. So, I think this question is crucial, because if we are able to translate this towards many people out there, to journalists and so on, then we can also convince them that SSI is the crucial point here. In case also we are able to transfer this knowledge about SSI, then you also have a very, 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 very strong argument against the data silo companies from the Silicon Valley. So therefore, I think this question, therefore I wanted to add this question because it shows that SSI possibly can do this. And of course, we all know this. It's just in the early steps here. Okay, what are current challenges here to build an SSI ecosystem? Helge, you are working with in a consortium. I think you are best suited to answer this question. What are challenges?
Yeah, so the biggest problem is really to find partners. When we started, we only had 5 partners, and nowadays, via the Union Consortium has nearly 60 different partners in the private and public sector, and that is really key. Self-sovereign identity is nothing that you can build in your garage alone. So you have to cooperate with other institutions and convince them that SSI is a great technology and that it's worth to invest into it, and especially build use cases on top of that. Another really a big topic is user acceptance. So people using it are not interested in blockchain technology at all. We want to have it as convenient as possible. And we have really to compete with all the Apple and Google wallets. And that is really key to make it as easy as possible. Regulatory compliance is another big topic. Mark already mentioned the EIDAS regulation, and we have different trust levels in the EIDAS regulation. And this is something we have to take in mind, because at the end of the day, we need to be compliant with the EIDAS regulation. And my last point would be interoperability. At the end of the day, we do not have one ecosystem. At the end of the day, we see a lot of ecosystem projects. Even in Germany, we have more than 5 different ecosystem projects, and SSI is not one technologies, where different concepts, different DID methods. We have already more than 50 different DID methods. And this is something we need to connect with the kind of different ecosystems to build really one big ecosystem, or at least different ecosystems that are able to share data with each other. And for me, what are the most 4 important points to build an ecosystem?
Okay, perfect. Would the others agree, or would somebody like to add something? Maybe Franziska, would you like to add a couple of points here?
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe just this general comment on this, because I agree with everything Helge just said. These are the most crucial points if you're trying to build an SSI ecosystem. And what is also very important, which is actually standard if you're doing big projects, also in the government area, is you have to define your targeted use cases or processes you want to cover with the system you are building, and then you have to go into the depth analysis to see if really SSI is the best fitting technological approach to solve those problems you have. And then the next step is really to do another deep dive into all participants in the system you're trying to build, and to analyze their relationships. This is also something Mark just mentioned. All issuers and verifiers, for example, belong to the same entity. Do they know each other? And if not, then it is very important to cover not only the verification but also the validation of an issued credential. And this is then where the government aspect comes, and you need to build this ecosystem around to really connect all the participants to ensure those processes.
Okay, perfect. What about standardization? Maybe Mark?
Right. I mean, that also belongs to the last point that Helge just mentioned, right? Standardization is really important here. You basically have a lot of standardization in the SSI concept. If you think about the largest consortia with the most important DID methods, then there's a lot of standardization already there, I would say. But as I mentioned in my initial couple slides, you usually need to add more stuff. So there's usually like an admin role involved or other things similar to that. And it seems like there are several problems that need to be solved over and over, despite the fact that everyone has them. And the solution should not be that you have to stick to one provider or one network or something like that. So there should be a standard way to approach standard problems. And I think that is something where we're not quite there yet. We're still working on solutions that we can broadcast to others to use as well.
I think it is very important to talk about all these topics, because, you know, people need to understand it, because only then they will see the benefit that it might be a better world than what we are seeing now. Because, you know, when you're talking all about SSI right now, I'm questioning myself, why is the SSI community so small in Germany? Why you know, all the people who want their data to be protected, you know, why are they not here in the call? Why is it just 100 people and not 10,000? You know, this is straight, but you know, it's a matter of understanding, and it's a matter of translating these technical points to other people. But you know, it's also very early, so it will take a little bit more time, I would guess so. Okay, but let's proceed. The, you know, applications are endless in this field. We heard about the driver's license and so on. What are specific applications which could potentially be built with SSI, or which have maybe already been planned with SSI? Franziska, you would like to give it a start, and then we move it over to Felix maybe.
Yes, thank you very much. So what also Mark already mentioned in his presentation, the COVID-19 pandemic gave a kind of big boost on activities in the SSI area, and we saw many solutions using different technologies, but also many solutions covering the use cases with SSI approaches. And one example for those is the IATA travel app. So IATA is the International Air Transport
not IOTA, to be not confused.
IATA, the International Air Transport Association, and they built a travel pass app. And the goal of this app is that every traveler can have required credentials that they can be verified by airlines or border control authorities. And the first step, what they did is they added test credentials into this app, and there we are again back in the verification and validation point, because for the COVID test certificates, it's not only necessary that you have it and that you prove to have it, but it is also necessary that the verifier knows if this test center that issued this credential is really doing tests, is using the proper methods that are accepted by the border guards and the airlines, and this is something that cannot be covered by plain SSI processes. And this is also why IATA in the first step encouraged test centers to integrate themselves into the IATA system and to onboard themselves, so that IATA knows what test centers they are, what methods they use, and to onboard them on their SSI infrastructure. But what we can see, this is obviously nothing we can do on a global basis for all test centers and maybe all vaccination points. As we see it in Germany, every pharmacy can issue vaccination certificates. So this is nothing you can cover in one solution. And so the next step of IATA was to extend the usage of their app. And you can now, as the vaccination started, also upload your national vaccination certificates into this app if the government has an agreement with IATA and the data structures are covered. And so this is one perfect example. And we saw also that in this COVID-19 environment also, we have many solutions in parallel, not only SSI, not only blockchain, but also traditional PKI-based solutions, and that come from international standards. So those solutions exist in parallel, and I think this is a good reality check for the technology to see how it is handled and if it really can solve those problems.
One question about the vaccination topics. You know, we have these vaccination certificates now with us since half a year. And actually, I'm very positively surprised that in Europe we are able to roll out such an IT solution in a working way for hundreds of millions of people, right? Your EU has 400 million inhabitants, so this is fascinating. Of course, you know, running this on blockchain could have been even a little bit better, but of course the understanding also needs to grow on behalf of the relevant authorities. But what I wanted to ask here is, you know, the momentum was really nice to have this system in place. It's really fascinating to have an IT system in place which is working for dozens of millions of people in Europe, and without any delays. It was ready to be used, I think, by May or by June or by July this year. And with this, they have concepted, drafted, and implemented it quite fastly, right? Do you see that this momentum is being continued in the area of identity management, SSI, maybe also towards an European identity certificate, maybe even a potential identity passport on a European level, right? Expanding this across European nations.
What I really think is very positive was the approach to say we are not taking care how the infrastructures and processes in each countries are set up, and for example, which authorities issue the certificates or whatever. What we provide is the basic methodology, how to do it. We provide infrastructure connection points so that the verification across borders within the EU is possible. We provide the governments with the basic components as ready developed components that they can use. And the processes and setup is as a task of each country itself. And this is, I think, a very important point, because this reduces the complexity on the cross-national level. And I think the AIDAS is doing a very good approach in also doing this and saying, okay, we define standard interactions and infrastructures, and we assure interoperability, but you have a broad range of possibilities how you, and which technology you can use to implement it, as long as it fits the EIDAS regulations and is ensuring interoperability within the EU. And I think this is a very good approach to have the momentum on all involved levels.
So we could have, but this might be a little bit cynical, but concerning Corona and the vaccination status certificates and so on, we could have been happy that the EIDAS framework has been in place already, because otherwise we would have had a chaos, right? Can you say this, or is this too progressive to say this?
I'm not sure if there was of course, the idea of how to set up such an infrastructure was already there. So I think this connection is there. Technologically, we have other approaches that use similar technologies, like from the ICAO, the visible digital seal, which is also using a barcode with digital signatures in it that is defined a little bit different than the one the EU is using. But this is also an internationally standardized method to ensure that you can issue these 2D barcodes, for example, for what we call in Germany Aufenthaltstitel. This is where it's used, and that authorities can verify it because it follows the standardization by ICAO. And this is the technological approach that was used for the COVID vaccination also in the EU, with slightly different methods. But the idea behind it, this comes from both sides, from these standardizations from ICAO, and I think also from the ICAO EIDAS approach to set up the infrastructure.
Okay. Yeah, thanks very much for these extensive explanations, but it was very helpful. Felix, would you like to add something? We have been stuck with the question about what are specific applications for SSI, just to memorize it.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add some thoughts on the points before. So adding on what Helge said regarding the challenges when it comes to finding partners and regulation. I think one crucial point at this point is also that the regulator itself has to become a partner. So you have to deal with the regulation itself and the regulator becoming a partner. So also adding on the thoughts that you just had with the European level identity, especially for us as a internationally active company, it's crucial that we have an identity standard that is kind of usable even worldwide, not just on a German or European level, but we would have to use those identities obviously kind of everywhere in the world. And ideally, some standard or some partnering with the different regulators would be established that enables something like that. So one application to answer the question on that that just fits on this thought would be the onboarding or the KYC process for the car sharing process. That is something that we are actively working on right now. So imagine you want to take a car sharing vehicle. Right now you would have to register yourself and then go to some location where you would have to present that you have a valid driver's license, like either go there in person, or I'm not sure about the most current process, if it's also possible using video ident, but I think for many people also this is kind of awkward. And it still takes a while and it generates a lot of costs. So just changing that to using SSI for the onboarding process, just demonstrating that you are holding a valid driver's license in a digital manner. So that means you can just share your credential. It is validated within seconds and it doesn't really cost anything. And also it reduces any manual errors. So that is a total valid use case, but it also shows like our dependency as an industry from the regulator. So first of all, they have to establish like the digital driver's license that can be used, and it also has to be established and accepted internationally.
But it has been established, but it cannot be used.
Exactly. So that doesn't help for us at the moment, right? We want to use it. Yeah, but that is a use case that is really, I mean, I think quite obvious and would help everybody like right away. Maybe I can also elaborate on another application if time permits. So what we from a research perspective just recently did was working together with an energy grid operator and a blockchain startup that also works in the energy sector. And the challenge that they are facing is with more and more electric vehicles coming to the market, those vehicles have to be charged. And when they are charged, they demand lots of energy from the energy grid. So there's like peak hours where the grid might not be able to handle all those charging requests. So something that could solve this would be using the electric vehicles as some kind of decentralized energy storage. So the energy grid can kind of balance those different peaks and then make sure that the network never collapses. And the challenge that they have right now, I mean, this is already technological challenging, but it's also challenging from the perspective that they do not know about the vehicles. They do not know about the properties of the vehicles and also not about the properties of the charging stations. So if we could use SSI here, the vehicle could just prove its properties to the network, and then the network can validate if those settings of the car are usable for this use case. Like, is the battery capacity sufficient, or is the charging power that can be used sufficient to be used in that use case? Yeah, so that is something that we're just looking into, and I think that is really promising and also yeah, very, very relevant in the near future too.
Absolutely. So it's good to see the industry working on this. And Helge, I think Lissi and Commerzbank, you are the master of use cases, right? You have inspected many use cases. Can you also tell us a little bit more about, let's call it, the most interesting applications out there where you're working on?
Oh, yeah, we are currently working on more than 40 different use cases. It's really difficult to say what's the most important use case. What's really interesting for us, as already said, is KYC processes in banks. It's a really important topic with a lot of cost savings at the end of the day. But one use case, what we haven't spoken yet, is also identities for corporates. So together with our partner Bosch and many others in the consortiums, we're working on SSI credentials and identification for corporates, and that is really a really interesting process because it's not yet defined. You do not have any single identity of corporate. It's registries, Handelsregister, for example, and you have to collect many different credentials at the end of the day. And if we do an onboarding in the financial institutions for a big group, it can take up to 3 months. And at the end of the day, our idea is the corporate has one corporate wallet, and can store all different certificates from IBAN number to Handelsregisterauszug and also registered persons for the company. And you can hand over this data via one proof request, and you can do a KYC process, or for example, can use it in the supplier onboarding seamlessly, and you have an onboarding within minutes instead of in 3 months. So for me, that is one of the most interesting use cases so far.
The banking onboarding process, right? Or
it's not only the bank onboarding, it's also the supplier onboarding. The supplier, if you would like to become, for example, a customer of Bosch and Siemens, we have thousands of different customers, and whereas a lot of costs, and yes, this is something that could be really improved, this kind of process. So it's not only the onboarding in the financial sector.
Yeah. No, it's same with us as a university. For us, it's basically impossible to onboard to Deutsche Bank as a supplier. It's basically not possible. But what should I say? Let's proceed. What about implementation topics of SSI solutions? We're talking further on about more challenges, right? What challenges have already been solved, and which other challenges cannot be solved in the future potentially? So we heard a couple of challenges out there, right? Which of them have been solved, which of them should be solved, and which of these challenges maybe cannot be solved at all in the future? Helge, would you like to start here, or Felix? Felix, maybe you start from an industry perspective.
Yes, thank you. So I think, like I said before, one challenge is this cooperation with the regulation. It is being solved, but right now more on a national level. I mean, there's activities in Germany. There's activities not as intense, but also on a European level and on a North American level. But when it comes to Asia or to other markets that are relevant for us as an automotive industry, it's really not much happening on that side, right? So this is some challenge, I guess, that is really far ahead in the future, that those markets also adapt to SSI. So for us as an industry, that makes things difficult because we want to be on the edge. We want to use new technology and improve our processes, but at the same time, we have to act globally. So we would have to use two different IT systems, which then in the end, leads to discussions internally, which is the better solution and which is the one that works on a global scale, right? So I think that is something that is really, a tough decision and discussion for the next years.
Excellent, good points. Who wants to add something? Maybe Helge, what about further challenges?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge, and Mark already raised the topic with our ID wallet, is security. So what we have seen is, that Chaos Computer Club raised a lot of questions regarding the security of our ID wallet. So that is something we need to really address. I think the biggest problem was a man-in-the-middle attack. So it's not possible to identify and verify right now. But to be honest, I think it's fixable, and we're already working on solutions. At the end of the day, it all comes back to initial trust. So what we really need is, so self-sovereign identity maybe is not the right term. I prefer to use self-determined identity because identity did not come itself. So there needs to be somebody who gives the identities, and what's exactly what I think we should build it. At the end of the day, we need a proper initial trust model, and it could be derived from EIDAS. For example, if we have trust service providers that give identity to certain institutions where they're issuing and verifying data, when we can really build on a trusted SSI solution. And for me, this is really the biggest problem that we need to solve in the next couple of months.
Okay, what about, there was one question coming from the audience, right? What about Apple Wallet? You know, on the iPhone, there is already a very nice wallet solution, which is also able to authenticate myself, for example, with Face ID and credit card payments and so on. This works very nicely. Is there a chance to collaborate with Apple on integration of SSI? Because, you know, it should be in your interest, and it should also be maybe in Apple's interest to somehow integrate this, because they hold the interface to the customer with the iPhone and the camera and the Face ID application, right? And that's a question we did not explore previously, but maybe somebody wants to give it a try.
I think this is really difficult because Mark also raised the topic. We saw Apple is against the DID method, and that's not because it's not proper designed. But I think it's completely relates to the business model of Apple. The business model of Apple is to have everything in an ecosystem. That means you have one Apple wallet and no other wallet. Our concept with FSI is you can have different wallets. We're all working on the same standards. And if I, as a customer, would like to have another wallet, I can take my verified credentials and bring it to another other app. So it's transferable, and that's something that's completely against the business model of Apple. And so I see where's a lot of competition, and maybe you have seen it. Apple is pushing the driver license in the US. That's another ISO standard that was mainly standardized by Google and Apple. And what I observe is that there's really a competition between Apple, Google, so the hyperscalers, and the European Commission. And at the end of the day, what I think we need sovereignty in Europe, and that has to be stated. And I hope the European Union will follow this path.
Same here, but we all have to admit, you know, Apple stuff simply works. I'm using it 10 times a day with the Face ID and credit card payments. It's a US device, the technology is US, and the credit cards is also US. So to some degree, the Apple Wallet is an entry into the US ecosystem somehow, with the device being US and the credit cards being US, and I'm using it for credit card payments 5 to 6 times a day, right? So this is indeed, this is not what we would call European sovereignty. I think we all agree here, right? Okay, but that's some other questions we talked about previously. What about misunderstandings when we are talking about SSI? So where do we see that people are having entirely different things in mind when they are talking about SSI? Maybe Mark, you have an answer ready?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we're talking to a lot of people about SSI, and it seems like there are two quite opposite ideas on what SSI can do or cannot do. And I think the one idea is really SSI doesn't really solve anything. It will just increase complexity because there's blockchain and wallets involved, and we already have different other technologies, and there's already APIs that exist and that would need changing and so forth. So that is the one side. They say SSI doesn't really solve anything. And the other side is really SSI is the answer to everything. It will solve anything just by implementing it will be done. And the second part, I think I addressed already in my talk at the beginning. That's really not the case. I mean, if you want to use SSI, you still need other things. You have to think about concepts, business logic, where to place additional infrastructure, and so forth. But also the people who say it does not solve anything, that's obviously also not really what I would think. There's a lot of stuff that SSI will make way easier. And I like the example of looking at online commenting sections, for instance. Today, anyone can just register with some email address and put a fake name there and write stuff that offends people, because it's really not possible for any news site to do a KYC because it's way too expensive. So you never know who you have there and who's writing comments. But with SSI, this could be so much simpler. You could really just, with 2 or 3 clicks in a very cheap way, make sure that it's the real name of the person who wants to write down a comment after a news article. And this is something SSI can really solve. We can make things way cheaper, way easier, and we can use identities in so many more places, offline and online. And this is something I really think only SSI as a concept, as we know today, can solve, and other things, other ideas will not live up to that, to these possibilities.
Excellent points, excellent points. And let's go back to the applications and talk about Germany. What frameworks, platform solutions, applications are people in Germany currently, really working on, in the sense of, that the project is progressing and at some point of time it might become live? What are the key projects we are in Germany currently working on, or maybe in Europe, whatever you have in mind here? Helge, maybe I think you have a very good overview of what's happening in this ecosystem.
Yeah, technology-wise, in Germany, a lot of projects are using Hyperledger Indy. A lot of people say, okay, it's an old technology, and maybe there's even better technologies. But to be honest, we think it's reliable, and we're working on it to improve it. Also important is, from a blockchain perspective, you do not really need a blockchain for SSI. So where a lot of interesting other protocols, for example, like the did carry protocol or the did web method, and that is something a lot of institutions in Germany are looking into it. And what I observe is what's most important for the people is not the blockchain technology, but it's the agent-to-agent communication. So agents means that is the kind of software protocol that's above the wallet that ensures the communications between different companies and institutions. So it's peer-to-peer protocol. And that is really important because for most of the German projects are working currently on this protocol, and Hyperledger Areas is this protocol, but most of the people are currently using. When it comes to different ecosystems, we have the secure digital identity showcase that was already mentioned by Mark. We have 4 major projects: ID Union, ID Ideal, ONCE, and SD IKA, that are fostered for the next 3 years by the Ministry of Economics in Germany. So, and what's really interesting, we're working a lot of startups, traditional identity providers, and big companies. They all work together and even competitors work together. And for example, in our ecosystem, in the ID ecosystems, we have also traditional identity companies like VeryMe, like ID Now, like Yes, and we all work on the same standards. And at the end of the day, you need really have a common sense of all the different projects. Otherwise, SSI will not become a reality. What's also really important in Germany is the ID ecosystem of the German government. Unfortunately, we had this problems with the ID wallet, but it's still in progress, and hopefully we see the first results at the beginning of next year. That is also somehow dependent on the new government. But my opinion is that it's a really great project and will be also done by the new government. Overall, we can see the eIDAS, and every European country at the end of the day have to apply with eIDAS, and there is some kind of technical discussions that should be finished by the end of next year. So that's called the eIDAS toolbox. To be honest, I do not think that this will be finished until the end of next year. So it will take some time longer. And after the eIDAS toolbox is finished, there's one more year and all the European governments have to implement it. So at the end of the day, if we have luck, in 2 years, every European citizens can use an identity that's somehow self-sovereign. We call it even in the eIDAS self-determined wallets. So it's not explicitly mentioned SSI, but to be honest, it's the same concept.
It's interesting, in case you're talking about this, I'm currently also imagining when do I have to showcase my passport. At this point of time, the highest use of the passport is the combination with the COVID vaccine stuff. So in case you are sitting down in a cafe, they want to see both. So that's the usage of the passport right now. And elsewhere, you're not onboarding to a new bank, on a weekly basis. This is something which is happening not too often. But where else would you using the passport and the identity? Where we are, of course, logging onto all kinds of online systems. I'm also a user of the online banking of Commerzbank, for example. Somehow combining it there would be fascinating to ease things, right? And the police, and the police, in case you are having to showcase your identity to the police, when you are driving too fast and stuff, or things like this, then this is also a use case where you have to showcase the ID frequently, also other people, right?
Yeah, but what's really important is with eIDAS is not only for public use cases and regulatory use cases. So also eIDAS is addressing the big social media platforms. So platforms that have more than 50 million users could be obliged to use this kind of identities. So this could lead to that in 2 years, you can sign on with your digital identity wallet, your European digital identity wallet with Facebook and Google. Yeah, and that's really an interesting point. And we do not want it, but this will be a really interesting discussion at the end of the day, and I'm looking forward to sign into my Google account with a European wallet.
Let's see what happens here. It's very exciting. We have 2 more questions left. One would be, so imagine you are somebody who is building an SSI-based ID now. What would you still be missing for you to use it, right? So where is the missing part? Is it a passport manager? Is it an ID card? Is it an app? Or what is the missing piece here in case you would like to build such a solution? Right now, maybe Franziska, do you have an answer?
Yeah. So maybe the question is pointing on if I would use it, and the first question is, of course, the use cases that are covered by the solutions, do they meet my personal needs? So if a use case that I use regularly, as you already mentioned, is covered by the solution, then of course I would take it into consideration. And the next important questions go then again to how the solution is actually designed. So the first and most important point for me personally is are really SSI principles covered, and is no sensitive personal data written on chain. So this is for me a very, very important point, because we saw also that some solutions still write data on chain, which I personally don't like. Then of course, what do I as a user have tools I can choose from. So do I trust the providers of those tools, for example, of a wallet? Are they maybe certified so that I can be sure that they really do what they tell me what they are doing? And then really in the usage of such a solution, for me, it would be very important to see how the verification processes are designed, because my self-sovereignty is a very critical point, and we saw this with these cookie regulations in internet. So theoretically I have the choice to say which cookies I want to have used and which not, but the solutions are designed in a way that it is more convenient just to click on it and accept all cookies for a site. And I think their combination of SSI and the data minimization principles from the GDPR regulations are very important, because then I as a user can say, we have to follow these principles, and I can make a point on my sovereignty and say, for this use case, it's only necessary to share this and this data, and not the complete set of data that you are requesting from me.
Okay, good points. Okay, and the very last questions we have, I think we already talked a little bit about it, but in case we are now progressing by plus 1 year, 2022, where do we see first adoption of SSI being happening in Germany or in Europe? Helge, I think you already pointed a little bit towards this direction, but can you be a little bit more clear, where will we see it maybe in plus 1 year? Maybe.
Yeah, our target is to have pilot use cases in the Union Consortium in the next year. It will be small use cases with 30 to 50,000 users. For example, in the Commerzbank, we're currently working on a project where we can reset passwords. So if reset passwords with an identity that we give to all our employees, that is an interesting use cases. Really big use cases could be within the Chancellor project. That somehow depends on the new government, and yeah, will be interesting to see what's happening in the next months.
Absolutely. I think this was a nice closing word. Helge, thanks much. Anybody else wants to say some closing words? Maybe Mark, Felix, Franziska?
Thank you, Philip. You mentioned there's 100 people here, and you were wondering why there isn't 1,000 or 10,000. So please, to all of you guys here, tell your friends about SSI. It's an awesome framework. It's awesome stuff. And feel free to approach any of us. I think I can speak for all of us. Feel free to approach all of us if you have questions. And it was great to have you here.
Perfect. Great. So talk to you soon, and thanks much for the good preparation and also the very good answers. Thanks.
Thanks, Philip.
Talk to you soon. Yeah. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.